Well, welcome everybody to Going Deeper. This is the very aptly named place where we go deeper into the series that we've been looking at over the past month, whether that's in the rooms on Sunday or whether you've been joining in with the series online. We're so glad that you've come to spend some time to have this conversation with us. The reason that we do this live is so that you can be part of the conversation. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear what you've been thinking about and what you've been wondering on as we've gone through this series. So please do join in the chat. And if you're watching on demand, we'd still love to hear what you're thinking. You can comment below or you can email gotquestions@hollybaptist.org.uk and we'd love to have a further conversation with you. In a moment, I'm going to invite my friends Martin and Matt to come and join us to help us steer our conversation this evening. But first, I thought I'm going to throw out a question now that you can start to have a think about and that you can perhaps start to put your responses to in the chat. And the question that we're going to talk about a bit later on is this: why do we sometimes assume that God is a get out of jail free card? Why do we sometimes assume that God is a get out of jail free card, as in somebody who's going to help us to bypass difficult things and bypass unfortunate circumstances? So have a think, let us know what you think to that question. And I am going to invite Martin and Matt to join me now. And they have both spoken in one of the video messages that we've been looking at this series. By the way, if you've missed any, you can catch up on our YouTube channel. There's a playlist called Bear Hunt. Martin and Matt, great to have you with us.
Hello.
Hello. So we've been looking at this book over the bear hunt. We're going on a bear hunt because it has this recurring theme. We've got to go through it. Oh no, we've got to go through it. I'm curious as to whether, is this a book that you either grew up reading or have read to a child or a niece or a you, or?
I think it was more familiar to my wife. She used to do it in guides or something like that. I think we used to do it all together. But no, I came to it later on in life and used to have read it to my children.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I read it growing up. And just before the series, you bought it, and I thought I would have another read through. So I found myself reading a children's book just on my own in the house one day.
Yeah,
bit of heavy reading.
A gripping read, yeah. We'd love to know if you're in the chat. Why don't you let us know where you're watching from this evening, and if you have experienced this book, did you enjoy it? Let's talk about this series. So I'd love to hear, you guys both spoke for one of the video messages. So Martin, you talked about consequences. Matt, you talked about death. That was a good, nice, easy subject.
I'm glad I got to choose first.
Yeah. Talking about consequences sounds bad until you know that next somebody's got to talk about death. So
yes.
Yeah. Did you guys have standout moments from the whole series? Something that stuck with you?
Can I say, Becky, I just thought it was a really great series. It's one that you put together, and I just thought it was so creative and fun, and yet with a real serious side to it. I mean, there was a whole sermon on death, so you can't get much more serious than that. So yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was just a great series for August, really, when it's holiday season. So yeah, thank you, Becky, for all the hard work you put into it. It was
so
great.
Yeah, I loved it. I think the sort of novelty of it being a children's story and that being the theme meant that you could approach some of these more difficult questions that you might not be able to do in a serious tone, almost in a bit of a fun, jokey way. So we got really deep, but it didn't feel particularly heavy the whole way through. It was fun and light. So you did a great job with that, Bex.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good. Sometimes children's stories are like more profound than we give them credit for, right? And actually, they can be really good entranceways into kind of more difficult territory. Let's talk about. So let's recap. We've had the first week. We talked about going through transition, like something that we all come to and we think, oh, I kind of wish that I could skip over this bit and get to the point where I'm at the other side. And that was like going through the river that we see in the book. And then we talked about consequences. Like we'd all like consequences not to be a thing, right? We just get to do what we want and like maybe forget about the consequences and leave them till later.
I find that with cheese and onion crisps.
That is a very, very practical example, Martin.
It's the consequence of having an aftertaste, and I just don't like the aftertaste. It's quite nice at the time.
That is so true. Then we talked about death. And, no one wants to face the question of mortality. They don't want to face it about somebody else. We certainly don't want to face it about ourselves. And then we talked this morning about sort of facing that scary thing, that sort of hostile enemy or hostile territory personified in the bear in this book. The metaphor is the bear in this book. That really we would just want to turn and run. The things that make us want to turn and run and hide, but actually we know that's actually the thing that we've probably most got to confront. Are there ones in there that for you right now, where you're at in life, you found to be kind of most relevant?
I think not so relevant for me, but certainly the first one on transitions. It happened to coincide with us saying goodbye to a couple who had been in the church for 20 to 30 years, and they were moving to a new home to be near their daughter and new grandchild. And I think it was very poignant that we were saying goodbye to them, and then we were spending this time thinking about transition, which was something they were going through, which is significant for them. So that was really good timing, I guess, and really special as part of our Sunday service. Yeah. I think for me, it was it's that bear thing, that avoiding the bear in our lives and running the other way. And I have a tendency to loiter in the entrance of the cave. I don't run away so much with a lot of stuff, but I do hesitate to go in.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, for me, it was the death one, the talk that I had to do. As you may have heard if you listened to the talk, most of this stuff was stuff that I'd been kind of going through for the past year and lessons that I'd been learning. So I found it incredibly helpful being asked to write the talk, because I could kind of collate all my thoughts and ideas into one place, which is an opportunity you don't usually get. But yeah, that was one of those things that I just had to go through, and it came a bit earlier than I thought it was going to come in my life, and it all came at once, and for a long time, one after another. I remember sitting in the living room, Bex, when we got some more bad news, just saying, I'm exhausted, I don't know if I can handle any more of this. So that was one of those ones that was just really helpful to give a talk on, to ask some of those questions and ask that second question of why did I think the stuff that I thought. And it was kind of a product of curiosity. So I found that one so helpful. It felt like I was going on a journey with everyone rather than standing at the front and calling them to somewhere that I'd found.
It's that second question that you asked in the talk of not just what do you think happens when you die, but why do you think it? That's the journey that you have to go on every time you ever write a message, because you're like, okay, why do I think that? What's the underneath bit of that? And you're consolidating that as you go, right? So it's you're absolutely helpful.
Yeah, and it's a scary question to ask, isn't it? Because unfortunately, it can undermine the answer to question number one. But actually, you realise that you don't have a good reason. You haven't really thought it through, and it's probably best just not to think about it. And not to ask that question.
Yeah. By the way, there's as you say that, Martin, I'm thinking about a message from a previous series we did on core training about questioning faith. So perhaps I'll link that in the description of this video after it's gone live, because that's a good one again for unpacking those questions underneath the questions.
Yeah, I think you titled it around deconstructing, didn't you? But and that's the fear, isn't it? That once we start to question why we think about things, then things quickly unravel. We find ourselves in a worse position than we were in the first place. And yet, actually, for us to mature and to deepen our understanding and to move on and go through it, then we really do need to spend that time and put in that effort to dig a bit deeper, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I must say, Matt, when you did your sermon, it was just the atmosphere in our service. I don't know what it's like for people who watched it online, but there's a real kind of, not a heavy atmosphere, but it was serious, but actually at the end, it was a real joy. So we went into communion after it. And it just really, really fitted well. And it was a hopeful sermon. It sounds really depressing, doesn't it? Preaching about death. But actually, it's a sermon full of hope. So, if any of you guys haven't seen it, do go and watch it on the channel, because it was really good.
That's great. Thank you. I'd read a verse. Is it, Bex, you'll correct me here. I think it's Paul talks about it being better to be in a funeral for a young person than it is for a young person to be out at a party. And I'd always just thought that was a load of rubbish until I started going to all these funerals, and I didn't want to go and I didn't choose it. But you're right, there's a sadness to it, but there's sort of a clarifying nature that comes with living life, thinking about the end. I'm so glad that was helpful.
So it'd be great to know, if you're watching, if there's a particular thing that stood out to you as we've gone through this series. To me, that Chris talking about the roller coaster in the video that we've watched earlier today.
Sound effect.
Worth a watch, just for, I feel like you could make so many GIFs out of like that video. I don't know if Chris would be very happy about that, but
we don't care about that. Do it anyway.
That whole idea of when you get on a roller coaster and you're like, this is what I aim for, but it's the very thing that makes you want to, it's that moment where you're like, actually, no, I don't want to do this. And that's so true in life. It's so true in faith. And when you try to move forward in faith and take a bit of a leap of faith, something that stretches and challenges you, and you're like, this is what I'm here for. This is what I've wanted. I've wanted a more adventurous life. I've wanted something bigger and something better. But actually, this is the reality of what this is going to take is really scary. That really struck me as like, oh, that's so true, that sometimes we're like getting strapped into the ride and thinking, oh no, I don't know if I want this, even though it's why we came.
I think it sometimes it's how we define adventure, and I think the Christian walk is supposed to be a bit like backpacking, when you don't know where exactly where you're going to end up. You don't know, am I going to get a job? Am I going to be okay? Is it going to be safe? And I think a lot of us approach our Christian faith as more of a cruise. Okay, so you've got this safe, secure place, stopping off at different places for a little mini adventure where you've got a guide and everything's okay. Then you go back to your place of safety. And then we get a bit of a shock when things don't quite work out as they should do. Whereas, with backpacking, you kind of expect it. If you're a teenager going off backpacking, your parents are absolutely petrified. Whereas if you went off on a cruise, they wouldn't be quite so bothered.
Do you think is that something that's happening in the church, that we're becoming more like getting onto a cruise liner than going backpacking? Is that a cultural thing? Are we becoming less, up for adventure in our wider society?
When I was listening recently, and you probably heard a podcast from Karen Newhoff, and they were citing some research that shows that evangelism has dropped significantly. Outreach in churches, it means in America, but it's probably similar here. And I think it's because we've settled on our cruise ships. Actually, we haven't realised there's risk, and there's fear, and there's a bear that we need to face, and we need to get out there and get uncomfortable. And that's part of a Christian walk and the Christian adventure. Whereas I think we have a lot of us, including myself, would much rather have a nice, comfy place that is our faith, that gives us hope and security, and a nice, warm, snuggly place that we can retreat to, rather than an adventure that is full of risk.
Yeah.
I love the way you're going.
Well, no, I like that. I've not heard the cruise liner versus backpacking.
Sorry, automatic lighting's gone.
Martin's sort of mic drop moment after he's made a good statement, then all the lights go up. I think that's a really, really helpful picture, actually, of it also gives us a picture of why it is that there's risk involved and why it is that there's adventure. Because I think sometimes we slap that word on something to make it sound a bit more exciting. Like, for example, it was funny, I saw it on an M&S lorry overtook me on the motorway. Now, don't judge me that a lorry was overtaking me on the motorway. You know what lorries are. But they overtook me on the motorway, and it said, M&S, come and join the team. The adventure starts here. And I suddenly thought, I wonder if we, maybe sometimes we just use the word adventure so that we excite people about it, but we're not actually specific about what is the adventurous nature of the thing that I'm inviting you into.
So be careful, Becky. I know at least one person at Hawley Baptist Church that works for M&S, and it might be a very exciting place for them.
If you are watching, please tell us about the adventure that you are on. And I also love M&S. Other supermarkets are available.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that what you're saying about the backpack analogy helps us to think through what it is that we're talking about when we talk about adventure, because it's risk, it's not knowing the long term, it's being willing to sort of get up and go and be a bit portable, and not bedding down your roots in anything apart from the mission that you're called on.
Yeah, and I liked in this morning's sermon, Chris made the amusing comment that he never saw a bear hunt as a family activity.
Yeah.
And actually, you could argue, therefore, that if we're talking of the Christian walk as being a risky adventure akin to backpacking across the world, then actually it's not a family activity. So wouldn't it be far better and far safer for my family to settle for something a little bit safer, a little bit more secure, a little bit less risky?
And don't we do that all the time? We've got a place near us that does glamping, so it feels like adventure. It feels like you're out in the wild, and we can trick ourselves into, isn't it exciting? But actually, it's not camping. It's like being in a hotel. It just happens to have fabric walls to it, and I think that's something that in culture, I think we're starting to realize. I think we're trying to live. We all want to live this exciting cultural adventure. We all want to be out doing something meaningful with our lives that has a bit of risk and adventure. All our favorite movies and stories have a bit of risk and stuff to them.
Mm.
But rather than actually going out and risking stuff, because that's scary, I don't know about other people, but I definitely can find myself sort of tricking myself into feeling like it's an adventure and feeling like there's a bit of risk, even though there's not really. There's a thing going on in America at the moment that a journalist dubbed the Great Resignation. So they've got the highest rate of unemployment over there, and I think it's the same over here and in most of Europe. The highest rate of resignation from jobs ever recorded. And part of me wonders whether that's people after COVID thinking, you know what, I'm fooling myself. I'm not on an adventure. I'm not living the meaningful, purposeful life that I'm meant to. And it was really interesting. One of the stats was that the most people resigning are in sort of that middle stage of their career. So they're not striving really hard to make something of themselves. They're kind of past that point. And they're not the big CEO who's making big bucks and is like getting ready to go and retire. They're kind of the people who have kind of made it and are plodding along till retirement age.
Hit a plateau, really, and
life safe. And I guess they have tried to convince themselves that they're doing something meaningful and purposeful, and I'm sure many people are. But I think, how often do we do that in the church? And as Christians, we kind of think, yeah, I'm on an adventure, I'm doing something exciting. And you kind of think, I don't know when the last time I was really scared in my faith was. I don't know when the last time I was stepping out and I didn't know where the end result was going to be.
It's really difficult as a church leader, but as a Christian as well. What are the risks that we need to take? What is it that means to step out in faith? What is it that means that actually I'm pushing myself? And it's going to be different for everyone. We're all at different places, aren't we? And someone saying hello to someone at church might be a real big risk. Whereas for other people, it may be, going to Outer Mongolia to do mission work. It's very different. But yeah, if we all took one step forward into a risky place, that would transform our church.
Yeah. Maybe it's just like asking yourself the question, what is the thing that I know I should do that I have been pushing back and pushing back and pushing back. And that's the first step towards living a more bold, adventurous faith, is not putting that off any longer, taking that first step towards it.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not thinking what's exciting and adventurous, what's risky.
Yes.
Actually, it's just saying, okay, what is the one thing I know I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
And I'm not.
Yeah.
Well, just from the comments, thank you everyone that's doing comments. It's really helpful. Jen, my wife, said, safe is good, but can be boring. I want my children to experience an adventure with God. How, as a parent, I can help that happen is what I need to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you foster that adventurous spirit in others?
Yeah,
Martin.
What? I'm going to answer it. Maybe it's something to do with culture. It's something to do with example. Something to do with the books you read. I know some people read biographies, don't they? Because they want, you don't tend to find on bookshelves the biographies of people that led boring lives. They tend to be people who took risks, who went on an adventure, and actually by reading that can really shake us up a little bit and think, okay, I want that. What am I willing to do? So.
Yeah, I remember my parents reading me, it's terrible, I can't remember the names, but about some first explorers into the Arctic or something. It obviously really stuck with me.
Were they hoping that you would disappear into the Arctic?
Yeah, maybe it was a subtle hint. What about you, Matt? You're not parenting, but you've been parented, and you're a pretty adventurous guy. So
you paddleboard. You can't get much more adventurous than that.
For a millennial, that's pretty adventurous.
What do you think's helped you to foster an adventurous spirit? Have parenting, what influences have been there for you?
Yeah, there's a bit of me that wonders whether kids are naturally quite adventurous, and the job of a parent, and I say this totally not as a parent, so feel free to put back parents, is to kind of try and keep that going, because as we get older, we feel safer. I remember a couple of weeks ago standing next to Becky. We have I've got cousins who have got 2 young ones, and the things they do are just the most dangerous things in the world. They'll climb up stuff and hang off stuff, and I'm there sort of ready to go and catch them every time they're about to slip on something, or every time they're climbing a bit too high or being a bit too dangerous. And I keep remembering this quote. I'm reading Jordan Peterson's book at the moment, 12 Rules for Life. And he talks
about rule 4, I think, before I gave up.
Yeah, it is heavy. It's good though. He's talking about you need to let your kids kind of find their own bounds, because parents tend, because we know kind of we've been there and we see the experience of life, and we've seen kids fall off stuff, and we just kind of picture the worst things to happen, whereas kids have this curiosity and they're trying to find the limit to things. So we as parents, or we as adults looking after children, probably jump in too quickly and say, hey, here's the boundary, here's where it's not safe, here's where you need to try and put some sort of soft pillows around your area. And kids are saying, no, I want to go off on the big trail. I want to go off over there. I want to go off over here. And the same might be true for faith. Some of the questions that friends of ours, their kids ask about faith, you just think, wow, isn't that amazing? And yes, maybe we should go and do that. It's us as parents, I think, who tend to drop in things and say, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe we could leave that for another time. Yes, what a great idea. Let's try and make it a little safer.
I'm constantly doing that. My kids want to do something and I tone it down. Mainly because I can't be bothered to do whatever extreme thing they want to do, or clear up the mess they're going to create. But actually, that free spirit and just trying stuff, that's far better than sticking them in front of the latest Disney film or something. Obviously, that's good sometimes, but actually, how do we really just let them go for it and risk,
Yeah.
Becky, what's your answer?
What's my answer? I think modeling it is a big thing. I think I was talking, I've got my younger brothers staying with me at the moment, and I was talking with them today about how one of the things, as I'm in my 20s, I'm admiring about my parents, because you get this whole new perspective on your parents when you're an adult yourself. And one of the things that I'm really admiring about them at the moment is that they're much more, you kind of imagine that your parents are always going to be the same, that they'll always think the same, that they'll always do the same things, that they'll be sort of stuck in their ways or whatever forever. And actually, like, watching my parents try new things and learn new things, and watching them change and evolve, I'm really admiring that in them at the moment. And I think that there is an element of sort of adventurousness to them, which I really admire, that they're asking the question, like, and they are followers of Jesus, so they're asking the question, how does God want us to be living in this season of life, and what does he want us to be doing with what we have and the opportunities we have at the moment? And watching them do that is really inspiring to me. It makes me reevaluate thinking about getting to a point in my life where, because you often look ahead in life and think, at some point I'll settle, and at some point that will be, I'll settle into a way of life and a rhythm of life, and that will be kind of how the future looks. And it's been inspiring to me to see my parents sort of shake things up a bit and be a bit more adventurous. So
Neil or Angie says this: there's also something about injecting adventure into the normal, acknowledging that daily life is exciting and has adventure built in. And is this the same in church? What do you think about that? Is daily life exciting and full of adventure and we're just missing it?
There's 2 films that immediately come into my head. One is Up, which, whilst it has the whole, plot line of going off and in a balloon house and landing somewhere in South America, also has that kind of the spirit of adventure that the couple, like the montage at the beginning, It's sort of that. Is it adventure is out there? Is like the little.
And they never went anywhere, did they? Until
but they
after
had
his wife had died.
But they had an adventure together.
Yes, but they had a life and adventure together. Yeah.
And also, there's this film called About Time, which I absolutely love, which is about a guy who can time travel back into his own life, so he can redo things. But the conclusion that he comes to at the end is that the best way to live is to live as if you came back deliberately to do that day again. And that's all about bringing sort of adventure and meaning into those more daily rhythms and routines. So I like that, Neil / Andy, whoever's coming.
Yeah, whoever it was. Yeah, it's scary, the idea of what your life drifting away as you wait for something exciting to happen. And I guess what Neil or Andy's saying is that actually, no, there is potential for excitement and adventure in your life. You don't have to go somewhere else to find it. Actually, there is the potential for that. I think that is that key, is that there's potential, but actually a lot of the time we miss it, rather than actually every day is excitement and every day is adventure. Because I don't think that my life's full of adventure every day, but there's the potential, I guess. But that requires that step, doesn't it? Some big for some small for others.
Yeah, I don't know if you can know beforehand whether adventure is, like you say, Martin, going off to the other side of the world, or just living a regular day, unlike fairly similar to the days before. I think curiosity is the key to that. I think if you go into it genuinely asking questions like, if Jesus was with me today, if I really believe that Jesus was with me today, how would he want me to be to people I interact with? Where would he want me to go? What would he want me to say? How would he want me to spend my time? And it might lead to a relatively normal day, if there is such a thing as normal. But it might mean you jump on a plane and you go off and do something crazy, or it might mean that you head over to someone's house that you haven't seen and just drop in unannounced and say, "Hey, I thought it was really important that I come and see you, and I just felt like, you know what, I'm going to do it today."
I heard it said,
I so often find myself thinking, you know what, I'm just phoning it in today. I'm tired, or I've got other stuff in, and I'm just not going to ask the question. I'm just not going to ask, God, if I was totally available and you had all my energy, where would you take me? I'm just not going to ask the question. I'm going to half ask it. I'm going to I'll read my Bible a little bit, but I'll be careful not to learn anything while I'm doing it.
Yeah. I don't know what you guys are like. I'm one of those sort of people that, say if someone texted me now and said, "Do you want to come out?" I'd be like, "No, I'm okay. You should have asked me yesterday," and then I would have said yes, and I would have planned for it. But not now. You know, I'm thinking about going home and sitting watching TV. And I remember hearing someone say, "Err on the side of yes," because we err on the side of caution, don't we? Actually, err on the side of yes. If you say yes to more things, I think it might have been Richard Branson. Actually, I read his one of his books, and err on the side of yes, and that's where the excitement is. That's where the adventure is. When actually you say yes to something that you probably would normally say no to because you can't be bothered, or it's a little bit inconvenient. Yeah, that's where the adventure can be.
That's really good. We've spoken a lot, haven't we, Bex, about being okay with being inconvenient to other people as well. I think sometimes we definitely have said, if someone came to our house at 11 o'clock at night and wanted a cup of coffee, of course we would let them in. The reality is no one does that because everyone's too embarrassed and self-conscious. But would I be willing to go around someone's house, even though it might be bath time for the kids, and even though their house might be messy? And am I okay to sort of hold that embarrassment and the awkwardness of being the one being inconvenient for the sake of deeper relationships or showing up for people who need you?
Right. Here's a challenge. If any of you are watching from Finch Hampstead, 11 o'clock, go around to Becky and Matt's house, knock on the door and ask for a coffee and see what they do.
Coffee in this house, we'll sort you out.
That's the real test. That is the real test. I think that this conversation is about that, injecting it into the everyday is very much in the vein of what Jesus is inviting his followers into, which when he talks about love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself, or love like I've loved you. And his whole kind of the way that he teaches that to people in their different circumstances is like, okay, so what's the next thing for you to do? So like, I'm thinking of, I was reading yesterday about the rich man who comes to Jesus and says, what must I do to like be part of the kingdom that you're talking about, be part of the world order that you're talking about? And Jesus tells him what the greatest commandments are, and he's like, yeah, no, I do that. And he's like, okay, so let's talk about the areas where you're doing that. And he says, like, okay, go and sell what you have, give it away to those who are in need. And that's the next place where you can do that. So he's offering that man an opportunity to bring that into more and more of his life. And, you know, it says the guy goes away sad because he's very wealthy. He can't do it.
It's a bit like saying, get off your cruise ship and get a backpack.
Yeah. And he's bypassing that adventure. But really what Jesus is doing is saying, like, here's an opportunity for you to embed that into more and more of your life. And that's kind of the invitation that we have, is like, in the day ahead of me, how do I embed more and more of like, what is there that I'm doing that currently isn't moving in the direction of loving God with everything I am and loving others the way that I've been shown love by God.
Yeah. Jen, just in the comments, Jen reminds us, but it's important to have Sabbath time, rest, listening. Jesus prayed before moving into action. I think it was, for Jesus, it was a rhythm, wasn't it? A regular rhythm. It wasn't like, oh, I've got something really big coming up, I better pray about it. It was a natural rhythm of his life to take those times of rest, those times of prayer, and those times of listening. And he says, I only do what I see my Father doing. And it's responding to those times of quiet and contemplation. And how do we inject that? It seems like the opposite of what we're talking about. Actually, to be able to move into the adventure that God has for us and pick up on those exciting opportunities and to err on the side of yes, and actually we need to be spending more time with God and letting his spirit fill us and guide us and prompt us and learning what is it, getting that habit, work that muscle of responding to the Spirit's prompting. Because I think a lot of us resist the Spirit's prompting. We talked about earlier, didn't we, about actually we don't have to be thinking what's adventurous and risky. Actually, what's that one thing we've been saying no to all this time? And that's, if we keep saying no, then we'll never say yes. And actually, the more we learn to say yes to the small things, the more we'll be able to say yes to the increasingly larger and riskier things.
Yeah. In the talks about, or I don't know where it says it. It talks about being faithful. Those who have been faithful, Jesus talks about, if you're faithful in the small things, then you'll be entrusted with bigger things.
It's the talents, the parable of the talents.
Yeah, that's it. So that we're learning those like disciplines and ways of stewarding things well, and learning how to live wisely in the smaller, more menial things. Then there's a progression from that towards being able to take on bigger things. And for some people, carving out a little bit of time to be quiet and to rest is their bear. It's the thing that they've been putting off because they're busy and they're frantic, and maybe they're anxious and they don't really want to face up to their own thoughts.
Maybe it's asking that question number 2 that Matt asked, and they don't want to. That's their bear. Yeah.
And actually, that the next step on like an adventurous and something in the adventurous spirit is that risk, taking that risk to be quiet for a minute and slow down for a minute and stop and carve out some time in the diary to be and to think clearly and to reflect.
Yeah. And I think talking to God is a great place to start that adventure, isn't it? I mean, some of the ways that Jesus taught his first disciples to pray are like calls to adventure. I mean, his famous prayer starting with, God, you're the king, your kingdom come, I'm going to do things the way you want them to be done. Like if we pray that and we're honest with ourselves and really mean it, I mean, that could be massive for our lives, couldn't it?
Yeah. As we wrap up, let's circle back around to that question I asked at the beginning. why is it that we sometimes think and assume that God is going to be a get out of jail free card for us, that he's going to help us avoid? And I think if we frame the question like that, sometimes we say, oh, but I don't think that. But what I'm realizing for me is at the moment, particularly when I pray, I'm making this assumption about God, that what God wants to do is to make my life easier and better and simpler. Why do you think we assume that about God? Or why do we want to think it?
Yeah, I think that's why I sometimes assume it, is because I so want it to be true. If I'm really honest, I would love a God who clicks his fingers and takes bad things away. I would love it if when the people this year that got sick and we spoke to God and said, hey, we really don't want this to be the end. If he clicked his fingers and I got what I wanted, that'd be great. I so want God to be a get out of jail free card sometimes. Yeah. And I need to remind myself how arrogant it is for me to think that I know what's best. That I think that getting out of jail free means that I get what I want. Where in actual fact, if I got what I wanted every time I prayed, I would be in jail. So, I think that's for me why I sometimes feel like that, is because there are times, especially when life does get a bit hectic out there with your backpack, if you do step out of the cruise ship onto the trails, you just want God to come and pull you out of it.
Yeah, and yet it's not particularly adventurous if every time adventure is a bit risky. It's like jumping out of a plane and God grabs you. No, back in the plane again. It's like, what? I was just jumping out it's actually, there's excitement in the risk. There's maturity in the risk. And that's one of the things about suffering. So I think a sign that we assume this a lot is when we ask the question, why does God allow suffering? Because that doesn't, if we inadvertently, maybe below the surface, assume that God is a get out of jail free card, then that forces us to ask the question, why does God allow suffering? Why do things go wrong? Because that doesn't fit with my way of viewing the life of a Christian or anyone. And yet one of the Bible's answers for suffering is actually it brings maturity, and it shapes us and changes us and makes us more like Jesus and gets us to somewhere. So yeah, I don't know where I'm going with it now, but
yeah. And of course we have this ultimate promise. So like there's these stuff, the day-to-day and the difficulty that we face now, but then this ultimate promise that in a sense God did make a way to get us out of the prison that we find ourselves in. That when Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished," that's literally what they used to write on prisoners, like the tablets outside prison doors, to say that sentence has been paid. That's done. It's dealt with. So the prison of our own sort of stubbornness against God, that Jesus has made a way for us to get out of that, so that we have freedom to take those other risks, right? So that there's freedom and there is an ultimate security even within these risks that we've been talking about tonight. That it's not risk and like it actually might all go to pot. Like even if it all goes wrong in this life, you have a safety and a security for
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't want to use this phrase because we're coming towards the end, but they talk about over-realized eschatology, which is actually that hope and that security we have in the end, we try and apply to the here and now, and that's maybe the issue here, is because, like you said, quite rightly said, actually we do have a get out of jail free card. That is what Jesus died for. So we have ultimate hope, we have ultimate security, we have an eternity with God. That's grace, but actually that doesn't remove the risk in the here and now. And we ruin our lives by trying to avoid the risk. Actually, we're given an ability and safety to risk everything, because ultimately we're not risking everything.
Can I just wrap this up. Thank you so much. That's been such a helpful conversation. I really hope if you're watching live or if you're watching on demand, that's been helpful to you. And please do keep asking your questions. And I'd love to just read from the letter of Romans, which is written by Paul, who started lots of churches, including the churches in Rome. He writes this about suffering and the going through it. It's like the ultimate bear hunt passage in the Bible. That's like we've got to go through it and why it matters that we go through it and why we have hope when we go through it. Paul says, that's not all. We also celebrate in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces patience. Patience produces a well-formed character, and a character like that produces hope. And hope, in turn, does not make us ashamed, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Those are some good words, which, yeah.
Cool. Thanks very much, Becky. Thank you for an excellent series.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. It's been awesome. And quickly tell us what's happening in 10 seconds in the next series, Martin.
Yeah, so actually it follows on quite nicely from this morning's sermon, where Chris mentioned about the Acts of the Apostle, and we're going to be looking at the Acts of the Apostle, Book of Acts, and some of the really exciting, adventurous, risky stuff that they got up to, and how it was all because of the Spirit moving in situations and through their lives. So it's called News Cycle.
Can't wait. Sounds good. Thanks so much for being with us tonight, guys. And take care. We'll catch up with you soon.
Bye.